It seems to me that the promises of this secular humanist world that we've really kind of gone into over the past couple hundred years has really fallen short. And here we are, modern people. We've done away with God and the stories of the gods. We don't need those anymore. And yet we're still struggling to answer the basic questions that ancient people asked themselves. Where did I come from? Where am I going? What gives life ultimate meaning? And although Joe and Graham in this episode wouldn't fall into any sort of traditional religious categories, they're kind of like all of us, coming from a secular framework, asking the questions that need answering. So let's get into it. I'm glad you're with me.
How do they, we have those images from ancient Sumer, which are 6,000 years old or so, that show what appears to be the solar system. So how do they...
Well, first of all, let's remember ancient Sumer was in Mesopotamia.
Yes.
And Mesopotamia is a Greek word, means between the rivers. And the rivers referred to are the Tigris and the Euphrates. And where is Göbekli Tepe? Right between the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Here it is. Hard to grasp relief of man holding his phallus found in Turkey. Can I see that image again?
It could be Karahan Tepe, where I've been. But I haven't seen that figure. It looks
like he's covering his phallus, like he's embarrassed. Or maybe he's pregnant.
Yeah.
Look, maybe it's the first pregnant man.
We don't know. We don't know what it...
I just think, so Joe's first reaction on seeing this statue is that it's possible that this is a man who looks embarrassed. I think that that's important.
Means.
I don't know what it
But he's definitely holding his...
It seems like it. It seems like maybe he's peeing.
No, something
else.
else.
What is he doing?
What is he doing? I don't know, and we don't know. The problem is no written texts have come down to us from that time.
Yeah. So here's what I find fascinating about this is that they're in the right area for where some people would think the Garden of Eden may have been located. Now, I am agnostic when it comes to the Garden of Eden. I think that there's more possibilities than sort of like conventional biblical scholarship would want to pursue, because of course there was the garden and then there was the flood. And so a lot of terrain has changed. A lot of geography has changed. You have 4 rivers in the Garden of Eden. 2 of them we can identify, and we assume that those are the same rivers from the biblical account, and not that when like Noah landed, they go, oh, those rivers, that looks like the Tigris, that looks like the Euphrates, and so we'll just call them that. So it does kind of leave the discussion open, which I find fascinating. But it is commonly held that we're in the right area when we start talking about Göbekli Tepe, when we start talking about Karahan Tepe, when we start talking about these early civilizations. And to me, it's just so funny that one of the structures that they're looking at is a man carved into the stone who's covering his crotch. And Joe points out that he looks like maybe he's embarrassed or he's ashamed. That is the story of the fall of Adam, right? After the fall, Adam and Eve realized they became naked and they were embarrassed. They were ashamed. And so the Garden of Eden is described as containing the headwaters of the Pishon, Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. While the Tigris and the Euphrates are still easily located, the Pishon and Gihon have been lost to antiquity. Of course, there was a big flood in between then and now, maybe more than one. Although many have attempted to locate, there's still kind of discussion on this. The site of Eden, given in Genesis 2:8, in the east, but it can be translated in the old as well. I also think that it's interesting that when you look at the passage, there's a tiered structure to the Garden of Eden. It's this 3-tiered holy space. There's the garden, there's Eden, there's the east of Eden, and then there's a garden. And we see this reflected in the temple. Now, I think it's really interesting because as I listen to some of these conversations about ancient civilization and where maybe the earliest civilizations came from, particularly Graham Hancock likes to bring up the story of Atlantis. He really likes that story. A lot of people like that story. I think it's a fascinating story. What's funny is that Atlantis, now it wasn't a 3-tiered structure, but it was this city that had these concentric circles moving inward. And so, again, I sort of tie this in more to Babel as far as Atlantis is concerned, seems to be tied more to Babel than it would be to Eden. But of course, what were they trying to recreate in the Tower of Babel? They were trying to recreate this place that could touch the heavens, that could be this meeting place between heaven and earth. And they wanted to make a name for themselves, of course. And so there's all of this kind of connection to Eden, early civilization, and these, what we're finding in like Göbekli Tepe and other places. And I did another podcast looking at this same episode with Joe, this same conversation between Joe and Graham, if you want to look at that for context. But I just thought that was a very, the carved man holding his crotch just is, it's too much like the Bible story. Okay, so yeah, we've got that 3-tiered holy space. That's Genesis 8. That's Genesis 2:8. And again, the conventional wisdom around the possible locations for Eden. After Adam and Eve were dismissed from Eden, they moved eastward. Two popular proposals for this location of the Garden of Eden are Lower Mesopotamia or Armenia. Okay, so that's what Graham just said, is that they're in Mesopotamia. And there's too many dots connecting to dismiss that. Now, what is the conclusion we might draw? For now, probably the conclusion is just that ancient people were more in tune with the reality of God's world than maybe we are today in our secularized consciousness, in our secularized world, where we've basically claimed we don't need God to explain this stuff. We just need, what we can see, taste, and touch, and what we can measure. That's all we need. And we'll get to a clip from Jonathan Pageau here at the end, which kind of ties that idea in. So I just thought, there you go. That where was Eden? I don't know. And I don't know that I need to know. But the human spirit longs for that home, that true home that we belong to. And so even though Graham, doesn't claim to be a Christian and is antagonistic to Christianity, he still has that desire to know and to understand that.
What isn't speculation is the dating. I have grave doubts about carbon dating in many cases, because carbon dating doesn't date stone. It dates organic materials. So the notion that you can date a megalithic site with carbon dating is questionable right away.
And what happens is you get a range of dates that then the archaeologist gets to pick, which best fits whatever narrative that archaeologist might be trying to put out there, or whatever theory that archaeologist might have at the time.
But what tends to be done is that you look for a piece of organic material that is so associated with the megalith you want to date that you can say or propose that they come from the same period of time.
It's also fascinating and somewhat terrifying that if the Younger Dryas impact theory is correct and it really did reset human civilization, think of how long it took for Sumer to emerge from total barbarism. Who knows what it was like for thousands of years?
Thousands of years.
Of survival.
I would suggest that there was a method of preserving knowledge, that those survivors of the cataclysm were not just looking at their immediate time, they were also looking to the future. How can we pass down knowledge to the future? And one of the ways you can pass down knowledge to the future is something like the Great Pyramid, which so big it can't be destroyed. And another way you can pass down knowledge to the future is in wonderful stories that people will keep on telling. And those stories may contain scientific information. The storyteller doesn't even need to know that information. As long as he or she tells the story true, the information will be passed on. And we are a storytelling species. So that's why I take myths very, very seriously. I think they are important evidence of our past. I think archaeology is making a mistake in ignoring myths, and it needs to pay much, much more attention to them.
It's interesting that Graham, and I'll show you a clip, you see that Graham is really antagonistic to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. He calls them the three major monotheistic religions. And yet I think if he understood a little bit more about particularly Christianity, which is the worldview that I speak from, you would realize that within Christianity, there is a deeply seated tradition of passing on stories. And all throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, but particularly the New Testament church, I mean, those people were committed to telling the story and telling the story faithfully. They went through great lengths to make sure that their story was being told, remembered, and passed on, to the extent that the early church really invented what we have today in the book. Like, that was a piece of technology that they invented in order to preserve that tradition of storytelling that they were so committed to. They went from the scroll to the book, to the codex. And so we really have those early Christians to thank for a lot of, even, you could say that gives birth to the whole information age that we are experiencing right now. But I just, one sort of point maybe of encouragement to Graham and others like him is that I think Christianity has been misrepresented for quite a long time. And so we have to be careful that when we're critical of Christianity, we're actually being critical of what Christianity actually is, not some secularized, modern interpretation of Christianity that, to be fair, I think has been very misrepresented. I think there are a lot of people who have called themselves Christians who didn't do a good job of representing what Christianity truly is. And so I hear in Graham's voice an honesty there. Like, I think he's being really honest. He really does believe that stories and myths are important. And yet on the other side of it, it's like, well, but not those Christian stories. It's like, well, those are some of the people that were the best at preserving ancient stories. So you got to give them credit.
Itself, I think there's an old saying, when you get a lot of flack, it tells you you're over the target.
Yeah.
And I think I am over some kind of target here. Truth will come out in due course. Whether it happens in my lifetime or much later, I don't know. But I'm sure we're missing a part of our story.
My fear is that it's going to repeat itself, and we're not going to learn before it happens.
That's an unfortunate character of the human race, that we do not learn from past mistakes. And we live in a world now dominated by hatred, dominated by competing nationalisms, dominated by competing religions. I have no time for and this is going to annoy some folk, but I have no time for the mainstream monotheistic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. I think that the three of them are behind so much of the trouble and chaos and hatred in the world. It's okay to have your religious faith. That's great. But to say my faith is right and your faith is wrong, that's the first step on the road to ruin. And that's what's happening today, is these exclusive religious ideas that compel people to behave in really obnoxious ways towards each other. There's nothing more dangerous than ideas sometimes. And ideas have driven so much of the conflict in the world. Look at the ideas behind Hitler's rise to power and the conflicts that resulted. People bought into those ideas, and it led to disaster. And that is happening in the world today.
So this is the kind of the vitriol that I was talking about that Graham has. And I do sort of I have to chuckle for a second there, just because it is ironic that the frustration coming from Graham is that there are people making exclusive claims, and you can't do that. Don't make exclusive claims. And that in and of itself is an exclusive claim. And so it kind of fleshes it out. Like, there is truth, I think, that leads to freedom, and then there's lies that sort of hold people captive. And one of the things that for me was, I guess, reassuring about Christianity is that it's a universal invitation to an exclusive claim. It is exclusive, but everybody can come to that. Everybody can come to the person of Jesus. And I think as sort of Christianity has been misrepresented, I think that is something that we need to do a better job of representing to people like Graham, because I get it. Like, I understand his frustration here. Religion does have to own up to the fact that there is some conflict that is caused by people holding those religions. Like, that is true. So the conversation here is going to turn to psychedelics, DMT, ayahuasca, stuff like that, which Graham is sort of famous for talking about on Joe Rogan. But I think the ancient civilization conversation ties to this conversation, which is going to be about death and the afterlife, and how do we comfort those who are facing their own mortality. And so for me, the idea of where I came from really does tie into the idea of where I'm going, and ultimately helps me answer that question of what's going to happen after I die. And certainly there's some, fear of the unknown there. But in and amongst that fear, there's still at least a way, a means by which we can arrive at a place of comfort and peace. But are secular people able to do that same thing?
At my age, which is now 73, I can't avoid being aware that my time on this planet is limited. My work, my studies, my experiences over the years have left me with absolutely no fear of death. I do regard it as the beginning of the next great adventure. It's something that I think is going to be fascinating
When
and
you say
interesting.
the
But
next,
can I just finish?
please, yeah.
I fear pain. I do fear pain, really severe pain, the pain of a lingering, terrible cancer, for example. If I found myself in that situation, that's an appropriate situation to take opiates. They're heroin and heroin derivatives can be useful in the management of pain. But otherwise, I would steer completely clear of them. But yeah, the next great adventure.
What do you think that is? When you say the next great, where are you getting this belief from, and what do you think it is?
A lot of it comes from the work I've done with ayahuasca over the years. It goes back to a near-death experience I had in my late teens, massive electric shock. I left my body, was up around the light, saw myself slumped on the floor, and then I came back into my body. But from that moment, I doubted whether I am just my body or whether there's more to me than that, more to all of us than that.
Well, and this will tie into Jonathan Pageau, because there is a sense in which somebody can have a revelation, a theophany, which I think is interesting. That would be God revealing himself to humanity or to a person. But if there is no God, it's interesting to hear people tell these stories of like near-death experience where I left my body and what was I looking at? I was looking at myself. Because in a world where there is no God, there's no theophany. There's no God revealing himself to that person in that sort of transcendent moment. There's only the person looking back at themselves, sort of lying on the ground, let's say. That's all there is. So I find that interesting as we enter into this conversation about the afterlife.
A friend of ours in the UK, Amanda Fielding, runs.
Yes.
You've had
I
her on
love
your
her.
show.
Yeah,
She's
she was
wonderful,
amazing.
wonderful lady. She runs the Beckley Foundation,
Yeah.
and they are. Amanda has been very effective over the years in getting legislation changed and in funding research into psychedelics. And one of the things I know that Amanda is looking at is hospices that offer psychedelic therapy, and I think that would be very useful. You're not obliged to take the psychedelics. It's a free
Right.
choice. But they would be available in a setting with experienced practitioners who know what they're doing, who know how best to offer these medicines to help people transition through the death process.
And it's been shown that, particularly psilocybin, through these end-of-life fears, that it has an amazing effect on
Has
people.
amazing effect. People in a terminal condition with cancer who've been terrified of death stop being afraid of death anymore. It's not consuming them anymore. They feel that they're part of something wider and larger and bigger. That this body, this life, this time and place is only an incident in a much longer story.
Which is, to me, one of the weird things about rigid atheism. This concept that when your brain shuts off, when your body dies, consciousness ends, and it's just blank. And it's just our ego that wants us to believe that there's something more and greater afterwards.
So annoying that.
Well, it's just
Richard
weird.
Dawkins,
Yeah.
the selfish gene. He's responsible for a lot of that thinking.
Well, it's they don't want to buy into foolishness. And a lot of them believe that at least some of the beliefs of organized religion are just mythical, foolish notions that people attach themselves to in order to comfort themselves, but that they, of the superior intellect, don't need those comforts.
That's right.
And they can embrace the darkness.
And so now we're sort of just back to, Bertrand Russell, right? So he's kind of like made Richard Dawkins who he is, but this rigid atheism that says that religions were just invented because some people were afraid of death and they needed to find comfort. But what I think is so funny is that aren't we just doing the same thing with DMT at this point? I mean, we're literally just said that DMT is being used in these scenarios to help people, comfort people with sort of these end-of-life transitions. And This is Russell. This is Bertrand Russell, right? Religion is based primarily upon fear. It is partially the terror of the unknown and partially the wish to feel that you have a kind of elder brother who will stand by you in all your troubles and disputes. Fear of the mysterious, fear of defeat, fear of death. And so we again, remember, we've inherited this secular idea. There is no God. So what must we hold on to? Well, we're going to find the answers in DMT. We're going to find the answers in ayahuasca. We're going to find the answers in psilocybin. Just take this thing that is in itself natural. It's a part of nature. Okay. And that we're going to get to Pageau here, but that thing that's just natural is supposed to help us with the supernatural. Maybe that thing which is natural and material is supposed to in some way help us with these metaphysical questions, these metaphysical worries. But it in and of itself is not from the metaphysical world. It's not from the spiritual world. So how could it be a guide to you into that sort of fundamentally spiritual quest for answers? And so we're stuck, right? That we inherited this from the ideas of Bertrand Russell and others, that Christianity was that thing, and yet here we are, full circle. Since we don't have Christianity, we need something else. Let's find it in ayahuasca, DMT, and psilocybin. Okay, fear of death. Fear is the parent of cruelty, and therefore it is no wonder if cruelty and religion have gone hand in hand. So that, on the one hand, is Graham Hancock. That's basically what he's saying. It is because fear is at the basis of those two things. In this world, we can now begin a little to understand things and a little to master them by the help of science, which has forced its way step by step against the opposition of the old precepts. Now, of course, I'm going to defend the old precepts. I think the older things are the better, are the more worked out. The classics are classic because they endured time. Science can help us to get over this craven fear in which mankind has lived for so many generations. Science can teach us. And I think our own hearts can teach us no longer to look around for imaginary supports, no longer to invent allies in the sky, but rather to look at our own efforts here below to make this world a fit place to live, instead of a place that the churches in all their centuries have made it. Yeah, so there is a book called The Faith of the Fatherless that deals with the connection between atheism and a lot of these sort of historically famous male atheists having really bad relationships with their dads, and some of their dads were Christian ministers. And so there's something to that, and I hear some of that in Bertrand Russell's vitriol here, not unlike the same kind of vitriol we heard from Graham Hancock. And yet Graham is looking for answers. He has limited himself by taking away one of the possibilities for finding those answers. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have done that.
But that they, of the superior intellect, don't need those comforts.
That's right.
And they can embrace the darkness.
And their intellects are so superior that they don't realize that they themselves are practicing a religion.
Yes.
That is a religious belief. If a scientist says there is no life after death, we are just accidents of chemistry and biology, that is not a statement of scientific fact.
Well, it's also the most arrogant
That's an opinion.
ones. The most arrogant ones are the ones that don't have the psychedelic experiences.
That's true.
Notice the people that have had psychedelic experiences, they waffle on those ideas a little bit. They go, well,
Yeah.
I don't know what that was.
There's no doubt that psychedelic experiences change people, and by and large, they change people in a positive way.
And I think some people are challenging that. I think that is a very good and honest criticism of kind of that branch of atheism, is to realize, well, this is in itself another type of religion. I think Paul Vanderklay did an episode recently kind of talking about that. And I think what that shows us is that we can't escape the need to have these questions answered. Now, I thought that their conversation about humility or arrogance and the need for humility was really interesting because, again, how does one approach these types of answers. I want to get to this Pageau clip here for you guys because I thought that this was really it ties in very nicely with this conversation, and I've really started to appreciate Jonathan Pageau. Of course, he was in the ARC conference, and I thought had one of the more compelling speeches there. And so here he is actually weighing in to the conversation about psychedelics.
Well, it's funny how that attitude is so universal, because even in the psychedelic world, let's say with ayahuasca, a lot of people are like, no, don't you dare do this without a shaman. And then even to go beyond that, it's like you got to be very careful which shaman you choose.
And that was Graham talking about the hospices, that there's going to be caretakers there that make sure that people are, doing okay if they were to take these psychedelics.
I mean, I've never done psychedelics. So it's like I can't speak from experience. I feel like, let's see, from a more traditional perspective, it's definitely more on the dangerous side, in the sense that the idea of a real spiritual practice is to be transformed, right? It's to actually rise up in the hierarchy of being, is like through humility, not through pride, but like through humility and practice and spiritual discipline, that you actually become more like the angels, become more like God.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, there's a lot here to unpack, actually, now that I think about it. One thought that I had while listening to Graham and Joe was actually just how much are we supposed to have alleviated? How much pain are we supposed to try and avoid? And how much is life a part of learning how to endure through pain, or learning how to embrace pain, or learning how maybe it's even pain and fear of the unknown can be something that is transformative. It can be the motivating force behind seeking these answers. And so you hear this. And so I think when it comes to the point that Jonathan Pageau is making, it's that there is a hierarchy of being. And again, ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin, as far as the hierarchy of being is concerned, they are just natural elements. They're part of the physical world. And they cannot be the guides for you to have that transcendent experience, to transcend the physical world into the metaphysical, into the spiritual, or into the afterlife, or helping you understand the afterlife. They can point to natural things. And I think that some people have had a lot of help when it comes to psychedelics and their anxiety, their PTSD. So it can be like a therapy or like a medicine. But is it going to open the door to some metaphysical encounter? That's the next question, because in and of itself, it's natural. But as a natural thing, could it open you up to revelation from the divine, let's say, or deception from the enemy? And I think Jonathan is actually going to point to that here right now.
And so it's not so much to just have these experiences of this world, but rather to kind of participate and rise up in the hierarchy of being, you would say. You see this image called the ascent of the divine ladder, where you see monks going up a ladder, and there's Christ above. Christ is the goal, right? We're actually aiming towards Christ, to become like him, to be united with him. And then there are angels that are kind of helping along the way. But then there are also demons. You see it in the image. Like these demons are like pulling the monks down, and they fall into like the mouth of Hades at the bottom of the image. And so their idea is not to either experience the angels or experience the demons, right? Their idea is to aim towards the transcendent, aim towards Christ, aim towards the place where heaven and earth meet.
And so, and if Christ is your aim, there is a word of caution here about wisdom that flows too easily, right? Like be aware of wisdom that you attain without working towards it. And what people are trying to do is replace a life of discipline and holiness with just like an easy medication, an easy fix to some of their problems, when in reality, those quote unquote problems actually, if you are focused on Christ, they have a metamorphosis about them. They transform. The very problem itself transforms into the thing that can get you nearer to Christ. When people think about a disciplined life of holiness from within a secular framework, they reject it outright, and they look for easier ways to gain that wisdom that they're seeking.
And then you will encounter them along the way, but that's not the that's not the point. And so the problem with I think with a lot of the psychedelic stuff is that people kind of rip open the veil and then move into this world, and they have these experiences, but they're not better people. Right? They're not freer from their own demons. They're not freer from their own passions, and so so they're more in danger than they would be if they would just kind of stay in the normal world. And but I say that, but look, I'd be honest with you. I know several people that did psychedelics and then converted and then just became Christian. So it's not
I've heard that. That's the thing that throws a wrench in the whole thinking about this, because I don't have necessarily a strong opinion of psychedelics or this or that, because they're so mysterious and they have so many different outcomes for different people. However, I would say that at the state that humanity is right now, it probably would be more dangerous than it is good. But I don't know if that's necessarily the psychedelics themselves, but just where humans are, because we're very prideful and very naive and can fall into these traps, you know?
Because of our sort of humanistic, secularized framework that we approach them with, I think that is a good caution to have in the back of our minds, and this is becoming just common to talk about. And so hopefully this is helpful to even carry on conversations with friends and loved ones. And if you're with me at this point, thank you for hanging in there. We want to give these topics the amount of time and attention that they do deserve. And I think this conversation about DMT, which is called the spirit molecule, which is being popularized by Joe Rogan and others, it is worth equipping ourselves to have good, meaningful conversation around this topic, because I think, to me, I wouldn't come out and just say, well, DMT is wrong or bad. I think it can be. Just like alcohol or coffee can be, if you have an addictive mindset, let's say. But it is also possible that it can be used for good. Yeah, I think, I've already said, that some people have found healing. I think the question then would be what is God's design for these elements that we're interacting with?
And also because we're materialists, and so I can see it. I can totally see it, because it's for all my love of Jordan Peterson, I love Jordan Peterson, but I think that this is one of the dangers that he's falling into. It's because it's easy you can analyze it, right? It's a mushroom. It's here's the chemical formula. Yeah. Right, here's the thing, it's right there. Just take it, you eat it, and there you go. So it's it's super easy. So the most materialist, the most scientific person can say this is this works. It's a pill. You take it, you have this experience, you can analyze it, you can calculate it, you can look at the person's brain and you can see their waves, whatever is going on. and so it seems like a kind of materialist shortcut, to the spiritual life. But I think that that's also why it's a problem. I think that that's why it's a problem, is because
we're not supposed to have shortcuts. That's why it's a problem. We are supposed to learn obedience and endure. I mean, this is Hebrews, right? For though he was a son, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And we don't like that. I understand that. I mean, that's hard, but that is the reality, right? Suffering is universal. Then what do we do with it? Do we just take a pill to try to get rid of that suffering? Or do we find a way to endure the suffering through a life that looks like the life of Christ? And that's sort of ethereal and woo-woo, but that's kind of the idea.
Look at even at the way that, I don't know if you saw that discussion you had with the guy who wrote this, what is it, I forget what it is. There's something about how mushrooms are at the source of our religions or whatever. Some book about that.
Oh, yes. I actually had him on. Yeah. the immortality key. Is that right?
I think that's maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But
If I did a whole episode on Briar Mirror Rescue and the Immortality Key, if you want to watch that one as well.
look at what they're doing. It's like, so think of the mysteries of Eleusis, for example, right? So you have this entire ritual that lasts several days and is extremely engaging and is like sworn to secrecy. You're not allowed to talk about it. There's a whole thing around the entire mystery of Eleusis. And then maybe at some point in this thing where they come, let's say, to the edge of it, then there's a substance involved in the experience. But now the materialist wants to just say, hell, that ritual stuff, it's all bullshit. It's the mushroom.
Yeah, it's the mushroom, dude.
Like it's a formula that I can analyze and that I can show you and that I can measure and so it's
right. So we do away with the spiritual element of it and the ritualistic element of it, and we just take the substance separated from those things. That's what the secular mind is at risk of doing in and amongst these things. And I think like there is something to be said for the fact that within a Christian framework, you have that, you sort of had the spiritual journey, and that is the rituals, that is the, life of discipline that can access the same answers, can access the same sort of solution. I don't want to say it like that, but that people are looking for. It is the answer. And it just doesn't come as easy as some people want it to, I guess. So yeah, we just want to separate, sort of want to have your cake and eat it too, so to speak.
Just such a materialist way of looking at reality.
Yeah.
That even if maybe in some cultures, psychedelics were part of the process of transformation of the person, the idea that they were the central part of it is complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense, and it's super dangerous, and it's like a materialist way of approaching these ancient myths, these stories, these patterns of transformation, and I tend to really be very cynical about this stuff.
So really just appreciate Jonathan there and his insight. I feel the same way, there is this caution. And there just, and most of the caution is that it's like the modern approach to an easy fix. And I think with that, I have this passage from Jude 8. And actually I'll get some context here because Jude is a strange book to begin with, but Jude 5, let's say, now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once and for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness of judgment for the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as examples of undergoing the punishment of eternal life. Yet in the same way, these men that are, sort of hovering around the early church and trying to deceive people, not unlike our conversation today, these men, well, okay, maybe he's referring to some of these guys back in the day, but it still is happening. Yet in the same way, these men also by dreaming defile the flesh and reject authority and revile angelic mysteries. But Michael, the archangel, when he was disputed with the devil around the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce against him a railing judgment, but said, the Lord rebuke you. So even Michael the archangel didn't revile the devil, though he probably deserved it. But these men revile the things which they do not understand, and the things which they know by instinct, like unreasoning animals. By these things they are destroyed. And so, again, Jude is sort of a strange book, but by way of caution, I think that this whole section would help us understand that there are some men, some people historically who, what he says in verse 8, by dreaming, by having these visions, by having these dreams, sort of they reject the authority of Scripture. They reject the authority of God's revelation, and they claim to have an authority in and of their own, which comes from these visions that they had. So we are definitely dancing on the edge of some spiritual warfare when it comes to any substance that would potentially open you up to this type of thing. Now, I think these people were using it specifically so that they could claim that they had the authority that came from these visions. I think that some people that might be just doing it recreationally may come to find that they believe in Jesus. I think was that Sean Ryan's testimony recently. You can check that out. Maybe I'll link it in the description of this video. But people are coming to Jesus, and God will use whatever means necessary. So I kind of remain agnostic when it comes to, like, I'm not going to pick a side that says DMT is bad or DMT is good or whatever. I think that there's a caution there that the human heart is wicked, and so the human heart can pervert anything, even the things that God maybe has intended for good. And so I hope that this is helpful. This is a really interesting conversation, and I know it's sort of nuanced, and there's always a lot more here. So I've started doing Wednesday afternoon live streams to kind of unpack more around these topics, and you're welcome to join me there or find any of the other videos that I have, share them with your friends, and have good, deep, meaningful conversations around the things that matter the most, particularly what comes into our mind when we think about God. So I'll catch you in the next one.